The lawyer opened the folder, looked at a room that had spent 30 years calling my brother, the broke one, and read my name first. Not our mother's. Not Gary's, the oldest. Mine. Danny fixed boat engines for a living, drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it, and every holiday someone found a gentle way to remind him he couldn't really afford to be there. We covered his share. We felt good about it. Then the lawyer said, estate, just under $240,000, not counting the property, and the room went quiet in a way I'd never heard before. If you've ever watched people be kind to someone because they assumed he had nothing to offer, you already know where this is going. I was the one who never called him broke. Danny knew that. I think that's exactly why he made sure I was the one holding the folder when everyone else found out what he'd let them believe. My name is Renee. I'm 52, I manage a dental office in the same town I grew up in, and until 4 days ago, I thought I understood my family. Not loved them blindly, I knew our flaws, but I thought I understood the shape of us. Mom in the middle, holding court. Gary, the oldest, always first to speak and first to be believed. Denise, the peacemaker who never actually made peace, just postponed the fights. And Danny, 2 years younger than me, the one everyone was gentle with, the way you're gentle with something you've already decided is fragile. Danny worked at Cormorant Point Marina since he was 19. Engines, mostly, sometimes docks and lifts in the off-season. He never married, lived alone above the bait shop in a one-bedroom apartment that always smelled like coffee and outboard oil, and he came to every family dinner with an easy laugh and empty hands, because somewhere along the way, we'd all agreed he didn't have anything to bring. Don't worry about splitting the check, Danny, we've got it. He can't help it, bless him. That job doesn't pay anything. Let's not ask Danny to chip in for Mom's birthday, he'll feel bad. 30 years of sentences like that. I said some of them myself. I want to be honest about that before I tell you the rest of this, because it would be easy for me to stand here and act like I was different the whole time. I wasn't cruel. I never mocked him. But I let the story stand, the same way you let a picture hang crooked for years because straightening it feels like too much trouble for something that isn't really wrong. I remember one Thanksgiving, maybe 8 years ago, when Danny showed up with a grocery store pie because that's what he always brought, and Gary made a joke about it in front of everyone. Danny brought the expensive pie this year, must be a good tip season at the marina, and the table laughed, and Danny laughed too, the easy laugh he always had ready, like he'd decided a long time ago that laughing along cost him less than correcting anyone. I didn't laugh that time. I don't know why that one stuck with me and not the others. I just remember thinking, watching him cut that pie into equal slices for everyone else before taking the smallest piece for himself, that there was something in his face that wasn't hurt exactly. It was more like he was taking notes. Danny had a heart attack on a Tuesday in March, alone in his apartment, and didn't wake up. He was 54. The funeral was small, the way I expected, the marina crowd, a handful of cousins, Danny's old regulars from the bait shop. What I didn't expect was a woman in a gray suit standing quietly near the back of the reception hall afterward, waiting until the room had mostly finished its coffee and casseroles before approaching my mother. Marian Doyle introduced herself as Danny's attorney, said she had been instructed, in writing, to read his will to the immediate family before anyone left the building that day, and asked if we could use the small side room off the reception hall. Nobody argued. You don't argue with a lawyer holding a folder at your brother's funeral. Marian Doyle was maybe 60, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head like she didn't trust them to stay put. She opened the folder, looked around the table, my mother, Gary, his wife Karen, Denise and her husband Rob, me, all of us still in our funeral clothes, and said, I'll start with the executor and primary beneficiary of the estate, per Mr. Ashford's wishes. That's Renee. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it didn't compute. I think you mean Mom, I said. Or Gary. I mean Renee, Marion said, and looked at me over her glasses in a way that told me she'd expected exactly this reaction. There's quite a bit more to go through before anyone needs to leave this room. Gary's jaw did something I recognized from childhood, the tightening he does right before he decides to be the reasonable one out loud. How much are we talking, in terms of, Danny didn't have much, so I assume this is mostly sentimental. Marion didn't answer that directly. She just turned a page and said, the estate includes a residential property at 14 Cormorant Point Lane, a business entity, Cormorant Point Holdings LLC, and liquid assets currently valued at $238,400. Nobody said anything for a full 5 seconds. I remember counting them, the way you count seconds during a lightning strike before the thunder arrives, trying to measure how close the danger actually is. That can't be right, my mother finally said. Danny didn't own property. He rented that little apartment. Mr. Ashford purchased the duplex at 14 Cormorant Point 11 years ago, Marion said. In cash, through the LLC. He's lived in one unit and rented the other. The maintenance contract business operating out of the marina, the one that services boats for 4 different marinas along the point, that's also his. He employed 3 people. I want you to understand what that sentence did to the room. Gary, Rob, my mother, they weren't grieving in that moment. They were recalculating 30 years of memory in real time, and you could watch it happening on their faces, the way you watch someone realize they've been reading a map upside down the entire drive. A man named Curtis, one of Danny's employees, had come to the reading at Danny's request, apparently written into a letter Marion hadn't opened yet, and he said quietly, almost to himself, he always told us family didn't need to know his business. Nobody in my family had ever met Curtis before that day. Danny had employed 3 people, and none of us had ever asked what he actually did all day beyond the marina thing. That was Discovery 1. It wasn't the last. Before we left the side room, Marion mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Danny had also left specific instructions regarding outstanding informal obligations between himself and other family members, to be addressed once I completed the inventory as executor. She said it the way lawyers say things they know will matter later but don't want to explain twice. My mother asked what that meant, and Marion said only that it would make more sense once I'd gone through Danny's personal effects. I remember Gary's eyes flicking toward Rob, just for a second, and I didn't understand why until much later. I'll come back to what Marion meant by informal obligations. It matters more than it sounded like in that moment. After the reading, Marion handed me a set of keys and told me, as executor, I'd need to go through Danny's apartment to inventory personal property before the estate could formally close. Gary offered to help, a little too quickly, a little too eager to get the practical stuff handled, but Marion said that we'll specified Renee alone for the initial inventory, and Gary let it go with a look I filed away without fully understanding yet. Danny's apartment above the bait shop was exactly as sparse as I remembered it. A recliner, a small television, a shelf of paperback westerns, a kitchenette that still smelled like the coffee he made too strong. It looked like the home of a man who genuinely had nothing extra, which made the locked metal filing drawer under his bed feel almost absurd. What does a man with nothing keep locked? I found the key taped inside an old coffee tin on the closet shelf, with a strip of masking tape across the lid in Danny's blocky handwriting. For Renee, when you get here. He knew I'd be the one going through his things. He'd planned for it. Inside the drawer was a spiral notebook, the plain kind you'd buy at a drugstore, filled front to back in Danny's handwriting. Dates. Names. Dollar amounts. At first I thought it was work records, invoices, maybe, for the maintenance business. It wasn't. March 2011, Gary, $4,000, transmission, pay back when bonus comes. Never repaid. August 2013, Rob, $2,800, boat slip renewal. Never repaid. January 2016, Mom, $6,500, assisted living deposit, Cedar Grove. Never repaid. The list went on. Small amounts, medium amounts, one large one. Every entry marked with a date, a name, a reason, and the word paid next to Danny's contribution, but never repaid next to anyone's return of it. I sat on the edge of Danny's bed and added the column in my head before I found the total on the last page, in his own writing, $60,850, as of the previous November. For 30 years, my family told itself a story about taking care of Danny. The story ran backward. He'd been taking care of us the entire time, quietly, and letting us believe the opposite. I didn't confront anyone that night. I needed to know if the ledger was even real before I said a word, so 2 days later, at the house while we sorted through Mom's kitchen for the reception, I brought up the transmission, carefully, like setting down something breakable. "Gary, do you remember when your truck needed a new transmission, years back? You said Danny helped you out." Gary didn't even pause. "Yeah, that was, God, that had to be 10, 12 years ago. $4,000, I think." Danny insisted, wouldn't take no for an answer. I always meant to pay him back once the bonus came through, but you know how it is, life gets in the way. He said it lightly, the way you talk about a favor you've stopped feeling guilty over because enough time has passed that guilt seems unnecessary. Did you ever think about the fact that he might not have been able to afford to lose that money? I asked. Gary actually laughed, a short, confused sound. "Renee, come on. It was Danny. He didn't have $4,000 to lose, that's the whole point, but he gave it anyway because that's just who he was. Generous to a fault. We always said that about him." "We said a lot of things about him," I said. "Most of them assumed he had less than he did." Gary's face changed then, the first real crack in his certainty, and he didn't have an answer. He just went quiet in a way I'd never seen him go quiet, and went back to wrapping plates in newspaper like the conversation hadn't happened. That confirmed it. The ledger was accurate. Gary remembered the exact amount, the exact circumstances, and had never once, in over a decade, considered that the money might have cost Danny something real. Denise was harder to test, because her name showed up differently in the ledger, not as the borrower, but as the one who'd asked Danny to help cover Rob's boat slip renewal without Rob knowing the full amount involved. I didn't confront her directly yet. I wanted more than one data point before I said anything that couldn't be unsaid. But I watched her at the reception that week, accepting condolences with the same easy grace she'd always had, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, and I found myself wondering, for the first time in my life, what exactly she'd been smoothing over, and for whose benefit. I want to stay with that ledger a moment longer before I tell you what I found behind it, because I think it's easy to hear $60,000, and move straight to being shocked by the number. The number wasn't the part that stayed with me. It was realizing that every single entry represented a moment where my family looked at Danny and felt nothing but comfortable, unearned superiority, and he wrote the date down and let them keep feeling it. I went back to the apartment that weekend to finish the inventory, and behind the ledger, tucked into the same drawer, I found a second notebook, a journal, dated entries, less financial and more personal. I almost didn't read it. It felt like the kind of privacy you're supposed to leave alone even after someone's gone. But Danny had left it exactly where he knew I'd find it, in the same drawer, under the same key, and I think that was its own kind of invitation. The earliest entry was from 12 years ago, not long after our father died and left a modest pension payout, maybe $18,000 total, that turned into the ugliest fight our family ever had. Gary and Denise argued for months over who deserved more, who'd done more caregiving, who Dad had really meant to favor. Mom stopped speaking to Denise for half a year. It was, until this week, the worst our family had ever behaved. Danny wrote, watched all of them turn on each other over $18,000, over a man they all say they loved more than anything. Made me wonder what they'd do with real money on the table, and made me decide I never wanted to find out the hard way. Easier to just let them think there isn't any. Buying the duplex next month. Nobody needs to know. That was the moment the whole shape of the last 30 years reorganized itself in my head. Danny's poverty wasn't something the family stumbled into exploiting. It was a test he built, deliberately, after watching what his siblings did the one time actual money was involved. He hadn't been hiding out of shame. He'd been hiding on purpose, to see who he really was to us once the assumption of his poverty was removed from the equation, and the ledger, all $60,000 of it, was the family answering that question for over a decade without ever knowing they'd been asked it. I remembered that fight over Dad's pension more clearly than I wanted to. I'd stayed out of it at the time, the same way I'd stayed out of the pity performance around Danny, not because I was above it, but because staying quiet had always felt safer than picking a side. I remembered Gary showing up to Mom's house with a printed list of documented caregiving hours he wanted credited against Denise's share. I remembered Denise accusing him of exaggerating visits that consisted of dropping off groceries and leaving. I remembered Mom, exhausted, finally splitting the $18,000 three ways just to make the fighting stop, and how even that solution left everyone quietly resentful for a year afterward. Danny hadn't said much during any of it. I'd assumed, at the time, that it was because he had the least at stake. I understood now it was because he was the one actually paying attention. I need you to sit with that for a second, because what came next is the entry that changed why I'm telling you any of this at all. I sat with it for a long time myself before I found the last entry, dated 4 months before he died, shorter than the others, and I almost didn't want to turn the page to it. Only one person in 15 years never asked me for anything and never called me the broke one, not once. Not even to someone else when she thought I wasn't listening. Renee brought me dinner on a random Tuesday last spring, no occasion, just because she said she was making too much and didn't want to eat alone either. She doesn't know I noticed that it was the only visit all year that wasn't about money, sympathy, or an errand. Leaving her the file. She'll know what to do with it. I put the notebook down and sat on the floor of my dead brother's apartment and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the funeral home, because I finally understood what the will reading actually was. It wasn't an inheritance. It was Danny's closing argument, addressed to a family that would only ever believe evidence, delivered in the one room where none of them could look away from it. We had a family dinner the following week, ostensibly to figure out next steps, with Mom's living situation now that one of Danny's contributions, Cedar Grove, was suddenly a complicated subject. Mom had gone quiet ever since the reading, quieter than grief alone usually made her, and over dinner she finally asked, in a small voice I'd rarely heard her use, whether the deposit Danny paid for Cedar Grove meant she owed something now, to me or to the estate. I told her no, that it had never been a loan in the way she was imagining, but I watched her spend the rest of the meal doing the same math I'd been doing for days, running back through years of assumed kindness, looking for the version where it hadn't secretly cost someone else everything. Afterward, in the driveway, I told Gary and Denise I needed to show them something before they left, and I read them portions of the journal out loud, standing between our cars in the cold, because I didn't think I could get through it sitting across the table from them. Gary's first instinct was deflection. He could have just told us. If he needed the money back, all he had to do was ask. That's not the point, Gary. He didn't need the money back. He needed to know if you'd have offered it without being asked. You never did. Not once, in 15 years, across 4 different loans, did anyone in this family ask Danny how he was doing financially, because we'd already decided the answer before he ever had a chance to give one. Denise didn't say anything for a while. She just stood there with her arms crossed against the cold, and finally asked, quietly, "Are the debts, is he expecting us to pay them back now? Is that what this is?" I understood why she asked it. It's easier to face a bill than to face what the bill actually measures. It's not about the boat slip specifically, I said to her, gentler than I'd been with Gary, because something in her voice told me she already half knew. It's that you asked him to help cover it without ever telling Rob the full amount, and you let Rob believe it was a marina discount for over a year. Danny wrote that down too. Not angrily. Just, factually. Denise's arms tightened across herself, and for a second I thought she might cry, but she didn't. I told myself it was temporary, she said. That we'd square it away eventually and it wouldn't matter how it started. She looked at me directly for the first time since we'd stepped outside. I didn't think about what it meant that he never brought it up. Not once. Not even when things were tight for him too, apparently, which I guess we're only finding out now wasn't ever really true. It was true enough that he chose to hide it rather than ask any of you for anything, I said. That's the part one keep getting stuck on. He had the money. He just never trusted that having it would change how you all treated him. Denise wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and asked again, quieter this time. So is he expecting it back? Is that what you brought us out here to say? No, I said. Marion told me yesterday. The will forgives all of it. Every loan, wiped clean, written into the estate documents right alongside naming me. He wasn't trying to collect. He never was. He just wanted the answer, and now we all have it. Nobody said much after that. There wasn't a scene, no raised voices, no dramatic confession. Just two people standing in a cold driveway, quietly rearranging what they thought they knew about themselves, which I've come to believe is its own kind of consequence, maybe the only kind Danny ever actually wanted. Stay with me a little longer, because the part that came after the driveway is the part one think about more than the reveal itself. I've spent the weeks since settling the estate the way Danny structured it. The duplex stays in the family, in my name now, with Curtis and the crew continuing to run the maintenance business exactly as they always have, because that was never mine to disrupt. I used part of the estate to set up a small apprenticeship scholarship at the marina in Danny's name, for kids who want to learn engine work and don't have the money for trade school, because I think that's closer to what he actually valued than anything sitting in an account. Gary called me a few weeks after the driveway conversation, and I almost didn't pick up. He didn't apologize exactly. I don't think Gary has ever fully apologized for anything in his life. But he asked, haltingly, whether I thought Danny had hated him. I told him the truth, which is that I don't think Danny hated any of them. I think he loved them enough to want a real answer instead of a comfortable one, and was willing to spend 15 years and $60,000 finding it out. Gary didn't say much after that. I don't know if it landed the way I meant it to. I've stopped expecting the people in this story to change quickly, if they change at all. That was never really the point of the ledger. And I started going back to the marina on Tuesdays. Not because Danny's there. He isn't, and I don't pretend otherwise, but because Curtis and the other two guys who worked for him still are, and somewhere along the way, feeding people who show up on an ordinary day for no occasion at all stopped being something I do for my brother's memory and started being something I just do, the way he apparently did it for 30 years without a single one of us noticing what it cost him. Last Tuesday I brought a tray of the same casserole I made him that spring afternoon he wrote about. Curtis said it reminded him of something Danny used to bring for the crew on slow days, no reason given, just showing up with food because he liked their company. I hadn't known that either. There's probably a lot I still don't know. I've stopped assuming I'll ever run out of things to learn about a man everyone else decided wasn't worth asking about. I think about that folder a lot, the one Marion opened at the reading, the one with my name on the first page. Not because of what was inside it financially, though I won't pretend that part didn't matter. I think about it because Danny built that file for 15 years, one unpaid loan and one quiet Tuesday at a time, knowing exactly which room it would be opened in and exactly which people would be sitting there when it was. He didn't leave us an inheritance. He left us a mirror, and made sure I was the one holding it up. So here's what I keep asking myself, and maybe you will too. If someone you loved quietly tested you for 15 years using nothing but ordinary kindness, and never told you the test was running, would you have passed? I'd like to think I would have anyway, even if I'd known. But I understand now that the only way to actually know that about yourself is to never find out you're being watched at all. There's no wrong answer to that. I just think it's worth sitting with. The ledger's still in a drawer in my house, closed for good, every debt forgiven in his own handwriting. I don't need to look at it again. I know what it says. I was the only name that was never in it. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Broken Bonds, and I'll see you at the next one.